Live. Thank you so much, Scribblers, for joining our exclusive monthly chat. I'm Lindsay Cummings, #1 New York Times bestselling author at HarperCollins. Today, we are chatting with senior editor at Amazon Publishing, Jessica Tribble. Jessica, would you mind introducing yourself to our subscribers this afternoon?
Of course. So, hi, everybody. I'm Jessica. I have been at Amazon Publishing, specifically at Thomas Mercer, which is our mystery and thriller imprint, for quite some time now. I've been there 6 years now, but I've been at Amazon for 8 in June. Before that, I did a brief stint at an audio subsidiary, Brilliance Publishing, which is located in West Michigan. And before that, I had every job you can possibly imagine at Poison Pen Press, which is a small independent publisher of mystery and thriller fiction located in Scottsdale, Arizona. So it has been a long, luxurious career of working on mystery and thriller novels and understanding bookmaking inside and out.
I love it. How did you decide, just real quick before we dive deeper, editing? Why that?
Well, as you know, most of us who work in publishing are, I have an English degree. In fact, my English degree is in something extremely useful. So I have a lit degree that specializes in Victorian literature and a master's degree that focuses on Renaissance literature. So, I was very, very employable from there, outside of the academic world anyway. While I was working on my master's degree, I really realized, I'm not sure I want to do this publisher perish lifestyle. So much of academia is based on whether or not you've got publications and whether or not they're well regarded and, fighting for tenure, et cetera. And I stumbled across a scholarly editing and publishing program that was offered through the Department of Public Policy and History at Arizona State University, and really sort of dipped my feet into the editing waters, as it were. That required an internship, which led me to Poison Pen Press, which then I stayed on and worked my way up through a variety of jobs until I left after almost 10 years as publisher. Although it was a small press. And so it was time to move on to bigger things in order to find new experiences and work with an even broader swath of authors.
I love it. I always love hearing the origin story of everyone in publishing. So we love getting to sit down with editors, sit down, so to speak, and pick your brains, because publishing is obviously, it's hard enough when it comes to all the marketing aspects. But if you don't have a really, really well-written book, then you've kind of got nothing to go off of. So we're going to bounce around a little bit today to different aspects of writing a book. So to start, we have a lot of writers that get into the drafting stage and they fall in love with their book. They fall in love with the process of writing. But when it comes to editing it and polishing it, they just feel like so stuck. So if you were to kind of give, say, a crash course bit of advice on how the heck to even begin, where should a writer start? What would step one be?
Put it in a drawer and walk away for a little while.
Amen.
I think the number one problem is that writers are very close to their manuscripts. And they're understandably, they're your babies, they're your children. I joke all the time that as an editor, my job is to bring the kindergartners into class and to make sure that nobody's out of line too much. Everybody's a little different, but everybody's got to stay in that focused area, in that way, to make sure that we reach the right people and give the message that we're trying to give to the right readers. So get a little space, and that space can help you come back thinking more like a reader and a little less like an author. I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but I, for whatever reason, saved all of my term papers from college. And when my mom was moving out of her house recently, we were going through the boxes of stuff in the garage, and I was reading it and I was like, did I write this? These are things I knew at one point in time. And I think that's true of the manuscripts as well. There's that old phrase about killing your darlings and knowing when you need to kill your darlings. And I think that's the hard part of editing and revising, is knowing when and how to kill your darlings. If you come back to the manuscript and you're still finding you're really struggling in that way, that's where freelance editors and writers groups are really your friends, because they can provide that fresh outlook that you might not be able to have.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so fascinating to me about just putting it away. And like you said, did I write this? I've even gone back and read my debut novel that I put blood, sweat, and tears into. And I'm like, I don't even remember half of this book. Like he put so much into it.
Something I did. Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing what kind of perspective you can get when you back away and come back later. Do you find that there's like a common theme running through a lot of debut authors' manuscripts that they need to work on in terms of editorial?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know that there is anything common in terms of thematics, but I do think that there are some common structural issues. I tend to be, the joke is that my superpower is the structure. I can really see the big picture and how it's all supposed to tie together, and what it is the author is trying to say. I had one book specifically where I remember diving into the manuscript and thinking, there's an entire subplot here that we don't need. And it literally lifted right out without much revision to the rest of the manuscript. So I would say number one, we see writers who have written themselves into corners, and they've made the plot go in such a direction that they've gotten somewhere that then they need to have these other machinations to get them out of that plot hole. And as that plot hole moves, they've written all of this extra material that could have been, I guess, avoided if they had just removed that portion of the plot altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Overwriting is an easy trap to fall into. You're so deep into the world. And then I would say that the other thing that debut authors often struggle with is knowing when to stop. It's very easy to just revise, tweak, and constantly be finding something else, and thinking, well, I'm making it better. But it's a lot like a recipe. If you do too many alterations at a certain point, you just end up with generic mush.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really trying to capture still what's new and what's fresh, and to come up with the recipe and the dish here being your book that is going to be enticing to readers.
Absolutely. When you talk about writing yourself into a corner, I think one of the things that I learned Scribblers is you don't have to delete that stuff and send it into like the abyss forever. You can save all those things as like really fun side stories, little novellas, different things like that you can later use for marketing and stuff like that, freebies that you can give away. So just a little pro tip.
And the author who lifted out the plot actually wrote an entire book around that plot.
That is so funny.
It's very easy to take those ideas and run with them in a new direction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's talk about world building. We could talk about that for weeks. I think that one is also just so hard for writers to nail down because I feel like it can often kind of feel like a task that just never ends. A world is quite literally an entire world. So I think there's a delicate balance when it comes to it. So we're not doing a massive tome of these descriptions on each scene, but we're also not skipping it entirely where the reader can't even envision, what's happening and where our characters are at. So what is some advice on kind of how to get that perfect balance of world building? When do they know that they've really nailed it?
So I'm going to speak more broadly in terms of novels that are not fantasy and science fiction, where I think that world building becomes really critical there and is often expected to be more robust and more detailed than it is necessarily in our more genre, our other genre fiction and our larger commercial fiction. So here's how I think about it. We are not connecting typically, and again, outside of the science fiction and fantasy worlds, we're not connecting with the worlds. We're connecting with the people who live in these worlds. So you want to give us the character and how that person is seeing the world around them. And I think what's often interesting, particularly when we talk about something like psychological suspense or other more psychological dramas in general, is that different people will see their world differently. And the information that we get then builds that world differently. I think that writers have a tendency to focus on the world as they see it, but so much about this book is not about what you wrote, but about how the reader is reading it. And providing them with enough information to fill in the pieces is really where you want to sit, so that you've got a taut narrative that keeps people moving forward with enough information that their brains can do what their brains do best, which is fill in the missing pieces.
I love that. I was excited to hear about that because to echo that just a little bit, you say, like in your bio that we put in our boxes, it says you're really big into film and TV, and you even kind of worked on that side a little bit with some of your books that you've worked on. So what I want to know is, I get like a lot of my world building inspirations and ideas, little tips and tricks, just kind of from watching really awesome TV and film. So what are some great examples maybe of world building that you've seen on screen that you think writers could learn a lot from? Just something that's done so well.
Oh man, there's so many. Before I had a toddler, I used to go to the movies a couple times a week. Now I don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
also,
same.
Pandemic. But let me think. So, if you think about something like, oh boy. Okay, so recently I've watched Ozark, right? And I'm late to the game, I grant. But again, see toddler conversation. And I think what's fascinating about Ozark, for instance, is that we all have a lot of preconceptions about Arkansas and Missouri and that area of the country in general. And what they do, again, really well in that show is that they provide us with very limited view of the world that we're in via the eyes of our characters. And I think that that's true of any film or TV show that does a really good job of unveiling the story more limitedly. Another great example, the classic example, is Breaking Bad, right? There's so much you learn about Albuquerque that you didn't even know you wanted to know as a result of what this looks like. We were talking before we got started chatting officially with everybody here about the various regions of Texas. When we look at Texas on TV, we think about, Cormac McCarthy and the big sweeping Texas plains, and, things are a little dusty, and there's cactus, and there's other, the horses and the ranchers and everything else. But if you've been to Texas, you know that there are very distinct regions that make it what it is. So it's about those communities again. And I think that the TV shows and movies that do a really good job of that create a community or a view of the space that they're in that is limited again to the character and really only giving us what we need to know. Now, again, there are your epics that show more of the world around you. If you look at something like Lord of the Rings, clearly you need to see the wide expanse that is Middle Earth. But if you look at something like Indiana Jones, where he's globetrotting, we're getting a very narrow, very limited view of each place based on what our hero is doing.
That's such a great point. We had a question. Abigail O'Rourke said, I'm from Missouri, and I think they did an amazing job of what it feels like in Ozark. It's not an area to be super proud of.
It definitely has a feel to it, right? I can always, what's the movie? It'll come to me. Sicario was filmed in the Phoenix area, which is where I'm from. And it was ridiculous. Like, I was sitting in the movie theater and I thought, why is this making me so uncomfortable and warm? And that's why, because it was dusty and dark and hot. It just looked hot. It's funny how those things are evocative.
I think that's what you're trying to accomplish in writing. With what you just said is, why is this making me feel like this?
Yeah.
That's exactly. I think that's when you've nailed it. Is when you feel like your reader is opening up the pages and going, oh my gosh, like, why am I wanting to turn the lights on while I'm reading this like mystery novel?
Totally. And there's a reason that when we say, Cormac McCarthy, everybody thinks, oh yeah, like Texas, that's where that is set. We have these images right away. There's some authors who you always know where their books are going to take you and what they're going to unfold. I think that it is fascinating to see how the author's version of those places might vary from your own version of those places. and what kind of feelings it does bring out in people.
Absolutely. We're going to circle back to the revising. We had a question come in from Liz. She says, such a great point about not knowing when to stop revising. Any tips there? And how do we know when to stop revising?
That's a really good question. I wish I had a magic bullet for that. The answer is you listen to your editor if you're at that point. Stop touching it. Don't put it away. Walk away. I would say that the hard and fast rule is that if you have revisited the same scene 3 times, you need to leave it alone because you're not thinking clearly about it anymore. You're just rehashing and reworking and touching it for the sake of touching it, thinking that it's not quite right. And I think that space, again, is really important. You also have to acknowledge that, writing a manuscript, much like parenting, is an imperfect process. There are going to be things that you didn't quite get right. And the next book is to improve upon that. It's a craft that we continue to hone as we improve.
Absolutely. I think one of the most perfect examples of that is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. If you look at the first book and then you go and look at the last book, you can literally see the way that she formed her own writing style as she goes through the series.
Yeah, and I think series books are particularly interesting for that. You can see how an author really takes a turn, incorporates new elements. Sometimes you can see points in their life where they're not quite sure what they're doing with their plot, and they're trying to find a new route for folks. So these really long series provide a lot of really interesting insight to the author themselves as a character.
That's awesome. I want to talk about titles. So I know that like when a writer is writing a query letter, for example, or pitching at a conference, the title is like something that we all stress over. So do editors kind of have that same, say when something comes across your submissions desk, is a title something that can make or break it for getting you guys interested? Or is it something that you're like, oh, it doesn't really matter so much. Let's change that if it's not marketable?
That's a good question. We change titles all the time. They literally never stick. I'm always really excited when a title does stick. There are a lot of considerations that go into a title that are outside of just what the plot is. One, of course, is marketability. 2 is whether or not it's been used a lot. So if you want to title your book, for instance, I Want to Hold Your Hand, you can bet that that's been used a whole bunch of times. Not only that, but it's the line to a very famous Beatles song, and it's going to be harder for people to find your book. 3, the title sometimes has to go through an iteration in terms of design. So as we're putting something on the cover of the book, we have to think about how it's going to fit, how the words are going to look on the cover of the book. Is it a really long title? If it's a really long title, chances are it's going to be a very type-driven cover. Does that fit the kind of book that we're talking about? And then, of course, there's just the ick factor. I had a book that came in several years ago that was titled Afterbirth, and every time we said it, somebody cringed. And it was meant to be 2 parts. It was meant to be about this woman, the story after she'd given birth, and also to refer to the very literal afterbirth. But everybody was just ew, ugh. And so the title had to go because nobody could say it in a meeting, even though it was relevant to the story, without all of us flinching.
That's hilarious. Let's real quick. I know this is such a massive question again, but as we're kind of talking about, you said, okay, let's go back. Do you often find, I know we've kind of talked a little bit about tropey things and world building. Do you often find, especially in something, you said you work a lot in thriller and mystery. So do you find that there is something that's really trope heavy that you keep running across? And is there a way that a writer can try to avoid those things without taking away the classic elements of, that genre?
I think one of the things we do really well at Thomas and Mercer and at Amazon Publishing by and large is that we try to find stories that stand out, that are coming from diverse perspectives, diverse voices, from a place that might add a new level of detail or an element of of storytelling that we haven't seen before. So tropes are great in that they let us know what we're expecting. Yes, in a police procedural, you're going to have somebody investigating. They're going to investigate some things. They're going to find some clues. And by the end of the mystery, or by the end of the novel, the mystery will be solved. Hypothetically. Turning that on its edge is really valuable, and finding unique ways to talk about that, whether that be from a new perspective, or that be from a new setting. I mean, let me give you a couple of examples. Example one, if I read another book about memory loss, I said to myself and to my acquisitions group, I'm not doing it. I'm not acquiring any more books about memory loss, I said. And then came in a novel, it was actually by Minka Kent, called When I Was You, which was a novel that has this idea of memory loss. We think that this woman has lost her mind, but it turns out that there's something much more insidious at play, that somebody has made her think that she's lost her mind. And so that was a new twist on something that I'd seen time and time again. I think that some of the struggle with this in publishing, of course, is that we know what works in a trope. And so trying to straddle that line of what works and something new, taking that risk, can be tricky. So several years ago, I received a manuscript that had a different title at the time, from Jess Lowry, who had been writing a different kind of book. She'd been writing a much lighter mystery prior to this. And she had this manuscript that had a 13-year-old protagonist, but it was very much an adult suspense. And this was a really hard book for her and her agent to sell, because everybody kept saying, oh, adults don't want to read about kids, about a child protagonist. In fact, we picked up that book. It's called Unspeakable Things. It was nominated for an Edgar. It's been nominated for Thriller Awards. And Jess Lowry has sold many, many copies more of that book than she has of any of the other books that she's published. So I think finding a way to turn those tropes is important, but the most important thing to any manuscript, in my opinion, is authenticity. So you can't try writing to a trend, or writing against a trend for that matter. You have to be thinking about, what is the story that you want to tell? Because the trend is going to change by the time the publication is happening, right? By the time it gets out to press, I mean, you're writing it for a year or so, then it's another year before it gets produced. What the world is thinking about can shift drastically, as we've learned in these last couple of years in that time. And so I'm always looking for things that take those ideas and push them in a new direction. I have a new book coming out actually in July from Rachel Housel Hall called We Lie Here, where she very much takes that family drama, and almost an Agatha Christie sort of sense about mystery, and blows it up into all sorts of really fascinating twists and turns. That one's available on NetGalley right now if anyone's interested. So again, authenticity, finding something a little unusual about the story, and telling the kind of story that you would want to read, instead of necessarily leaning back on the tropes, like memory loss, that have been done many, many times.
That was a perfect answer. The perfect way to end this too. I wish we had so much more time, because I feel like, I mean, you're just a wealth of knowledge.
Oh, thanks.
This was so much fun. Scribblers, if you guys are listening, there was a lot said here and a lot of really awesome advice. So make sure that you guys come back. If you didn't have a chance to take notes, come back again, get a notebook or get out your laptop and just take down all these awesome tips and tricks, because this really is how you grow, getting little bits of knowledge from people that have been in the industry for a long time. So Liz, or not Liz, good grief.
Jessica, Liz, whatever.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today. This was amazing.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's great talking to everybody.
Are you online anywhere for our Scribblers to follow you?
Oh, sure. I am on Facebook at Jessica Tribble. So it's pretty easy to find me. It's Jessica Tribble Wells. You will see me everywhere, and my authors are all linked to me. You can also follow me at Twitter at J Falstaff. That's J F as in Frank, A L S as in Sam, T as in Tom, A F as in Frank, which is an old handle I've had for so long that I don't even remember where it came from.
And are you open to? Is your imprint open to agented submissions only, or unsolicited, or
all of the above? I mean, typically we work with agents, but it is easy. It is easy to find us, and I have signed plenty of unagented folks as well.
Awesome. So Scribblers, take note of that, and again, make sure you look into Jessica and what she's interested in. And thank you so much. This was a really awesome chat.
Thanks, Lindsay. This was great.
All right. Bye, everyone.